As we begin our study of genetic inheritance, it is important to recognize the meaning of a few key terms that are repeated throughout the various explanations of different patterns of inheritance. And let's begin by looking at the type of research Gregor Mendel did when he was studying garden peas and developed his two laws of genetic inheritance, one being the law of segregation and the other one, the law of independent assortment. And so he was doing this research on garden peas precisely because these are plants that are easy to grow. You can keep a lot of these in a small space. They don't require a lot of control variables to produce the next generation. They have short lifespans. In a matter of weeks, you can see flowers being produced and seeds can be harvested, and then you can begin another round of experiments, breeding experiments. They also have easy to study characteristics. So for example, if you look at the color of the flowers, they would either be purple or they would be white. If you look at the color of the seeds would be yellow or green, or the shape of the seed was round or wrinkled. And so as we go down the list, you will notice that for each characteristic, there are only two variations, two possibilities that could be observed for those characteristics. And that made it real easy and at the same time powerful to state his law of segregation and law of independent assortment. And so how did he do the process of breeding? There are two techniques that are commonly used. One of those is going to be self-fertilization. When you're working with plants, all you have to do is cover the flowers before they mature so that as the flowers open and develop, the stamens which produce pollen are going to be the ones that are fertilizing the carpels with the ovaries of the flowers. So when you're looking at garden peas, you're looking at dioecious plants. That's a word we're going to be studying in more detail later. Don't worry about it right now. It simply means that two sexes, male and female, are housed within one individual. And so they can self-fertilize. They can use their own gametes to participate in the process of fertilization and reproduction. So that's all you have to do. Just cover the flowers with a bag before they mature. That will prevent the wind from bringing pollen from another source, or pollinators, insects visiting the flowers carrying pollen from another flower. Or depending on the purpose of the study, Gregor Mendel would also use cross-fertilization and to make sure that the plant he wanted to use as a source of pollen was one that was fertilizing the eggs of a plant. He would actually, as you can see here in this illustration, clip the stamens before they matured. This way, this plant cannot self-fertilize. And then he would use like a watercolor brush to remove pollen from one flower, the one he was interested in breeding, with another one. And so then he would transfer the pollen grains, which would stick to the bristles in this watercolor paintbrush, over to the stigma part of the carpel, which leads eventually to the ovaries where the eggs are going to be fertilized. In addition to these concepts of self-fertilization, cross-fertilization, it is also important for us to know the meaning of phenotype. When you're talking about phenotype, you're describing an organism's physical appearance. If I tell you, for example, I have black hair, well, hardly anymore. There's more of that gray hair coming up. But I used to have all black hair, brown eyes. My skin is brown. I'm describing to you my physical appearance. In a sense, I'm describing to you my phenotype. The genotype is what is responsible for producing our physical characteristics. An organism's genotype is the assortment of alleles, specific versions of genes we have inherited from our parents and have made us who we are, how we look, and how we function. Hybrid organisms are going to be those that are made through the crossing of two different parents. And so again, the word hybrid can have meanings in everyday life. For example, a hybrid car has two kinds of technology, an electrical motor. It also has an internal combustion engine. to move the car, and because you have two different technologies combined in one, that's hybrid. In our case, humans, were all hybrids because we can only be made by the process of sexual reproduction, with a gamete from the father and a gamete from the mother coming together to produce you. Monohybrid crosses are experiments that are done to track the inheritance of only one characteristic. So, for example, if Mendel wanted to study how flower color was inherited, he would pick two parents that are identical in every regard, with the exception of flower color. That's the only characteristic. Mono means one characteristic that was different, and then he could see how flower color was being inherited by following generations. Sometimes he would use a dihybrid cross, and that means that instead of just one characteristics, di means two characteristics will differ between two parents. Again, imagine two plants that look identical, but if you look at the seeds, one plant produces yellow round seeds, and another one produces green wrinkled seeds. So seed color and seed shape will be the two characteristics that could be explored, studied, how they are passed to the subsequent generations. So these are terms that you want to spend some time thinking about what they mean. They're not very challenging, but it is really important you have a clear idea in your mind what they mean when you go through exploring the different types of inheritance patterns in this chapter. Let's begin with Mendel's law of segregation. This is going to be the foundation for every other type of inheritance you're going to be exploring in this topic. The principle of segregation, also known as the law of segregation, is something that Mendel developed by means of monohybrid crosses. Well, we just studied that word. Single characteristic being inherited and passed from parents to offspring. So in a monohybrid cross, like in this example, two identical parents in every other regard, with the exception of flower color, one parent producing purple flowers and the other parent plant producing white flowers, were crossed, and that's what this little X here means. And notice that these are the parents, so we indicate that as a P generation, or true breeding parents. This is another important concept you should understand. True breeding means that this purple flowered plant has been the result of many generations where plants have only produced purple flowers. Likewise, for this true breeding parent, all of the previous generations that produced this plant only produced white flowers. So that's the meaning of true breeding plants. So the offspring produced by this cross is going to be identified as the F1 generation, or first filial generation. And what you notice here in this example is exactly what Mendel observed. All the F1 generation plants produced purple flowers. So let's go back to where we began. You began with two different plants, one producing purple flowers and one producing white flowers, and the offspring all produced purple flowers. There was no white flowers produced among this generation. And so to explore deeper, further what happened here, Mendel would then take two of these siblings, two of these plants that were produced by these two parents, and then he will cross-fertilize. Again, he would use pollen from one to fertilize the eggs of another one. Remember, we're talking about two plants of the same generation. And then what he observed after crossing two of these purple flower plants is that 3 out of 4 plants produce purple flowers and 1 out of 4 plants produce white flowers. So this color, which had initially disappeared in the F1 generation, reappears in the second generation, but it is only in a minority type of nature, only 1 out of 4 plants. So Mendel was looking at these results, and he was trying to develop ideas for how to explain this pattern of inheritance, which would always produce that 3-to-1 pattern in the F2 generation, or second filial generation. And so he began to reason. And he began to reason, saying, well, for every inherited characteristic, organisms must have two heritable factors. That is what he called them, because at the time he was doing his research, the word genes had not been invented. Heck, even the molecule of DNA had not been discovered. That came many, many decades after Mendel was doing these experiments. The idea of chromosomes, that didn't exist. But Mendel knew that it took two parents to produce these generations of plants. And so he reasoned that these parents are each contributing their heritable factors. Now we can call them genes. And those were being placed into the organism's genetic makeup, the genotype, producing the phenotype, the physical appearance. And so what he further reasoned is that if we have two copies of a gene, two heritable factors for each characteristic, those must split up. So again, before meiosis was explained and the reduction of chromosomes in half, so that meiosis produces cells that are sex cells that are haploid, each containing only half the number of chromosomes of the parents, Mendel came up with this idea. He said that pairs of genes are going to segregate, they are going to split up into separate cells at the time of gamete formation. And then again, think, what is gamete formation? What is the process that produces gametes? Well, that's meiosis. Meiosis is a type of reductional division that leads to the production of sex cells. And again, the genius of this man and his careful observations is that he was truly ahead of his time. He's describing processes that had never, up to this point, been explored at the molecular or the cellular level. Other observations he made was that those heritable factors, or genes as we call them now, come in variations. Variations of a particular characteristic of a particular heritable factor are going to be known as alleles. So think, for example, flower color. That is one characteristic. There is a type of gene, there's a sequence of DNA bases that is responsible for producing flower color. But in the case of garden peas, there are two different types of colors that can be produced. That's the alleles. For flower color and the gene responsible for flower color, there is a pink version, or I'm sorry, the purple version, and there is a white version. So purple and white, those are the alleles, the two versions of the flower color gene. Some alleles are dominant, like in the case of crossing two parents with different characteristics and all of the offspring showing only one characteristic. That is going to be the dominant allele. The one that didn't appear in the F1 generation, that would be the recessive allele. Later it appears, but it's only 1 out of 4 individuals that will be expected to have that recessive allele. Depending on the genes, on what two specific genes for one characteristic an organism receives, inherits, they can be homozygous if they have two copies of the same allele, two copies of the same gene, or heterozygous if they have one version of a gene and the other allele is the alternative version for the particular gene. So now let's put together all this information explaining this very same experiment that Mendel was conducting. So I'm trying to move my image here. I don't know if it will be possible to do. Okay. So this is the parent generation, P, true breeding parent generation. For the purple flower plant, we're going to use capital P as a symbol for the purple allele, because this is a true breeding plant and the only kinds of alleles it can have are purple alleles. Here would be the two according to the law of segregation. An organism has 2 copies of a gene, so this plant has 2 copies of the flower color gene. It has to be 2 of the purple alleles. Then for the parent with white flowers, white is recessive. We're going to show the symbol for recessive as lowercase p. Notice that we don't change the type of letter. We simply use capital P because P is the first letter in the word purple. And for white, we stick with the same letter, but we're going to use a lowercase version to show that that is recessive. Let's continue looking at the law of segregation. It says when these genes are separated, when these genes segregate, homologous chromosomes containing these 2 genes are going to split up in opposite directions. It says here that that is going to be the case. What happens during gamete formation? If you put one capital P in one cell and another capital P in another cell, what would happen is that all of the gametes are going to end up with the capital P. There is no other type of flower color allele here that could be placed into a gamete. So all the gametes will contain the purple allele, and for this parent, all of the gametes will contain the lowercase p or white allele. Let's cross these gametes. A sex cell containing capital P combining with another sex cells containing the lowercase p will produce, through fertilization, a new generation of individuals. The combination of those 2 sex cells will combine a capital P and a lowercase p. Now remember, the capital P is dominant, so that is going to be the color that is going to show, and that's why all of the plants in the F1 generation have purple flowers. When we take 2 of these plants and we split up these 2 alleles, half the gametes will contain the capital P or purple allele, and the other half of the gametes will contain the lowercase p or white allele. If you take 2 parents with these kinds of gametes, what you can do is, for the sake of convenience, show the possible outcomes in the form of a 2 by 2 contingency table. This has a name in genetics. We call this a Punnett square, and you line up the gametes for one parent. Let's say that the female gametes, the eggs, are lined up on this side. Here you have half of the eggs containing the purple allele, half the eggs containing the white allele. And for the father, the male gamete producing plant, the one producing the sperm, here we see the sperm cells containing the purple allele and the sperm cells containing the white allele. Then what happens if you cross a sperm with a capital P and an egg with a capital P? Show the results right there where the 2 gametes will meet. So capital P, that produces 1 purple flower plant. If you take this capital P containing sperm with a lowercase p containing egg, right there where the 2 of these gametes will meet on the table, capital P and lowercase p, that also produces a purple flower plant. What if this lowercase p containing sperm fertilizes an egg that contains the purple allele? Capital P and lowercase p right there, that also produces a purple flower plant because the capital P purple dominant allele is present. And the only way you can have a white flower is if a sperm containing the white allele, lowercase p, and an egg containing the white allele, lowercase p, here you see little p, come together in the making of a new individual. And this is how we end up with these ratios of 3 to 1. The 3 to 1 means 3 purple to 1 white. That's talking in terms of the color of the flowers. And because we're talking about a physical characteristic, this is going to be the phenotypic ratio. The phenotypic ratio is 3 purple flower plants to 1 white flower plant. In terms of genotypes, we see 1 homozygous dominant, 2 of the same dominant alleles. That's what we see right here. There's going to be 2 heterozygotes, 2 plants out of 4 having a capital P and lowercase p. That's what you see right here, and one homozygous recessive. Little p, that's your homozygous recessive. We have one of those. So the 1 to 2 to 1 is the genotypic ratio for this type of an experiment. And what I recommend you do is that you look at the end of chapter practice problems, and you try to practice your understanding of these concepts with some of those problems. In the subsequent videos that come after this one, there's going to be more additional opportunities for practicing how to set up Punnett square and also how to do the Mendelian genetics. Also, lab will provide you with an opportunity to practice predicting the outcomes of crosses and applying the law of segregation.